when I went back and kind of was looking at the early coverage, and when the news broke on June 20th about Cardinal McCarrick, it was a very dry statement that came out of the Archdiocese of New York. And it wasn't until July 16th when the New York Times the 16th and the 19th, the New York Times published 2 different articles putting faces to the McCarrick story and names to the abuse survivors or victims. How did those news stories from the New York Times, I wanted to ask each of the editors here. Jeanette, you mentioned that Catholic media doesn't have the same resources as the New York Times, so they were the ones that really exploded this story in the middle of July. And from the perspective, I think, from me as an observer, and I was moving at that time, so I was not paying attention to media. I barely caught the Archdiocese of New York story, but when the New York Times stories broke, you couldn't not see it. So take us through a little bit about how that story affected the reporting on the McCarrick story for each of your publications. Maybe Jeanette, do you want to go first?
Sure, I can. I mean, I have to admit, we are often following, the New York Times and secular news in our reports, and so we have to pay a lot of attention to what they say, and we try to touch it as closely as we can. But obviously, whenever you hear the story of victims, you listen with sympathy, and you hear the whole, you try to understand the whole story and the context. I think what happened as we heard more and more details about these allegations, what also happened, and you saw this not necessarily in the Times reports, but you saw it in other blogs or places where stories of rumors were coming out of things that were known in the past, and they were not. There was nothing known about minors, but I think putting all that together around that same time is where my team, some of them had been in D.C. during those years, were remembering murmurings and things like that. And so it kind of woke us up to something that was a lot bigger than one allegation of sexual abuse of a minor, which is big enough. There was more to this story, and that's what you started to see in that New York Times piece and the ones that followed, but also it opened the murmurings, and you had to pay attention to those, and you had to dig and try to find, something credible in those rumors as well.